To wed an Obsidian villain. A fated mate's enemies to lovers romantasy. By Vasilisa Drake. Audiobook copyright 2024, held by Vasilisa Drake. Narrated by Jack Calihan and Maya Gloss. Produced and directed by CTR Audio. Chapter 1. Lenora Tashe had never before regretted not having tumbled in the sheets, half drunk after a harvest celebration with some farmer's son. Not until it meant that the village decided her intact maidenhood made her a perfect sacrifice for the dragon tyrant. "Come on, Nora, don't be mad at them," one of said farmer's sons whined from the horse trotting beside her. "You know they didn't have a choice." Nora kept her gaze straight ahead. Her hands were bound to stop her from fleeing. It was obvious she was the victim of this arrangement, and she was under no obligation to absolve Garth of his guilt. "Do you really want to go there mad?" he continued, his nasal voice grating on her. "Go there?" Nora repeated before she could stop herself, her temper fraying. "By there, perchance you mean into the maw of that great beast?" "Someone had to," Garth protested. No doubt the boy was unused to people being angry with him. He passed for good-looking in their village, with long blonde curls and blue eyes that twinkled when he tried to flirt, skin that was tan from honest labor, but not so tan that you couldn't see the blush on his cheeks. He did, however, possess the least attractive quality a man could have in Nora's view. He had no problem selling her off to a dragon. "Someone! It could have been some sheep, the way it had been the past 50 years!" Every year the dragon demanded his due. Clothing, livestock, precious jewels, piles of gold. The village of Mossley had nothing more to offer than a paltry amount of animals each year, but even that offering was almost prohibitively expensive. A dragon might devour a dozen animals in one sitting if the rumors were true, but that same livestock kept the village alive through hard seasons. The life of one girl, well, it was worth less than the half-dozen sheep she took the place of. "You know what Bess said. It had to be someone pure, someone to appease the beast. You're our best hope, Nora. You should be proud to serve the village this way." If she heard the word pure again, she might very well use her bound hands to lean over and strangle the man escorting her. She had considered it more than once on their journey. But the truth of the matter was, even if she left, she had nowhere to go. She had lived in Mossley her whole life, and they had voted to send her off based on the ramblings of a madwoman. Her own stepmother had been the first to put her up, boasting Nora's untouched maidenhood. Who knew having more of an interest in books than village boys would be a death sentence? Because that is what it was. No matter what crazy Bess had claimed, the dragon would eat her. Beasts did not wed, not as humans did. "He seeks a maiden pure and blessed. No simple mutton will satisfy his carnal needs. If we give him this, a bride, we will finally be spared this tragedy. I have seen it." The old woman had raved for weeks leading up to the tithe. Never mind the strange words she'd said in parting, whispered only to Nora. "Of course, this is the time everyone decides to listen to her," she muttered under her breath. Garth had been distracted as he turned his attention to the map, because the boy needed a map to make the half-day's journey to the meeting spot. Nora was silent the rest of the ride. They reached the meeting point and were among the last to arrive. Woe be to any who attempted to skip out. The sun would be blocked out by a span of wings, and whatever unlucky villagers would find themselves without homes when the dragon was through. And any who dared to be miserly with their offering? The dirt was littered with scorch marks as evidence of past years' dissatisfaction. Mossley was one of the smaller villages in the area. Other towns offered as they usually did: sheep, cattle, Any manner of livestock would do, though word was the dragon was not overly fond of poultry. But this was the meeting spot for everyone who was tithing, including the highest powers in the land. On the other side could be none other than His Majesty's representative. Nora tried to make out what they had brought this year. An ornately carved golden chaise with jewels embedded on the edges. Any one of those jewels could buy her entire village. She supposed she should be flattered. A figure emerged from behind the metal couch. He was dressed more finely than any of the others and rode his horse with an air of presumption that was foreign to everyone in her village, except perhaps her stepmother when she had a choice bit of gossip. It was the stance of someone with a measure of power. "People of Weirdava, we thank you for your sacrifices this year. The great Obsidian beast will arrive shortly. Do not fear, for the demon will delight in it. Know you are safe, so long as your offering is suitably impressive." The Prince of Weirdava not so subtly indicated the heap of precious metal next to him. His eyes snagged on Nora. There was nothing remarkable about Nora's flaxen hair or the simple smock she wore, nothing that should warrant a prince's interest. He trotted over to Garth and Nora all the same. "Tell me, villagers, where do you hail from and what bounty do you offer? Tell me you did not forget." This was directed to Garth more than Nora. For one, she was a woman, and not an authority on anything so complex as where she hailed from in the eyes of the prince. And secondly, her hands were bound, marking her as the tithe rather than another representative.
Your Highness."
Garth dipped his head in acknowledgement, then bobbed again, as if doing an impression of a clucking hen.
"We are from Mossley, and, well, our seer suggested our suffering may end if we offer up a maiden, pure and chaste."
It took a valiant effort not to roll her eyes, though it hardly mattered since she would likely be dead by sunset. Instead, she helpfully lifted her bound wrists to show it was hardly voluntary madness. The prince opened his mouth to protest, but his words were drowned out by the thunderous sound of ocean waves. No. Nora would have smacked herself if her hands were free. It was not the ocean that roared around them. The rush of wind that blew through the field was as powerful as any spring storm. Her hair was tucked in plaits across her crown, the only thing that stopped it from whipping around her the way the prince's golden locks now did. It had been bright, not a cloud in the sky, with still a smattering of hours until sundown, yet the sun was suddenly blotted out by a massive figure. The effect was terrifying. The dragon slammed down to the ground in the center, 50 horse lengths away. It was an effort not to quake atop her own, which whinnied in fear. She'd grown up with tales of the Obsidian dragon who extorted Weirdava. It was the horror story told to keep little children in line. It was the terror told over a few pints of ales in an increasingly dramatic fashion. But none compared to the sight before her. Wings as wide as several houses spread as the beast landed, first rearing on its hind legs before stomping forward. They reflected the light with blistering intensity. Gazing at the beast was painful until it folded its massive wingspan against itself. But the retraction made the beast no less terrifying. Instead, it highlighted the rest of its features. Black scales rippled across its skin, with long fangs fitting over its maw as it faced them. Nora's heart nearly stopped as it fixed its gray reptilian eyes on her. "It's just examining its hull," she assured herself. On silent cue, people began to present their offerings to the dragon. The prince had moved back, grandly presenting the golden chaise. From a safe distance, 20 paces behind the servants, His Highness had ordered it carried forward. The pile in front of the dragon grew and grew. A crowd of livestock, more gold bars from the wealthier territories, books that Nora would never have been able to find in her small village, textiles even the mayor would not have been able to afford in a lifetime. And then Nora was pushed forward on the pile. Just Nora. Garth aided, forced, her to dismount from her steed. The village was not willing to lose a horse in this exchange. Where all the rest had been able to keep a distance from the dragon, Nora was now a mere dozen steps away from it, amidst a mass of sheep and cows. One eye seemed to follow her to her position. "Be brave, Nora. For once in your life, be brave." She would not cower as she faced her death. Even when its maw suddenly snapped forward, devouring in one solid bite several animals that had been next to her, she forced herself to stand, locking her knees in determination. But when it suddenly rose and grabbed Nora with a three-pointed claw, she screamed. Her heart pounded in her throat, choking her as it became impossible to breathe. The dragon was airborne with a flap of its wings. Higher and higher they went. Garth and the horses grew smaller until they were specks, and then they were nothing, as the dragon flew away from the villages and towards the mountain range. Her screaming stopped as she gasped for breath and looked below her. It was the most terrifying, exhilarating thing Nora had ever done. The sun began to set, and if not for the fact she was near being sick, she would have marveled at the colors at this close distance. But the sunset was not long as the mountains drew closer and closer. Even in her distant village, she knew this was where the dragons made their nests, kept their troves. The dragon flew into a cave that seemingly appeared from nowhere. Nora was unceremoniously dropped onto the cave floor, along with whatever the dragon had pulled from the tithe. Books, textiles, the garish chaise. It had not been able to take everything, but the dragon was known to return at its leisure for the offerings. Save on one day each year, all knew to steer clear of the field where the taxes were left. One did not steal from a dragon. It landed, its tail swaying about as it rounded back to face Nora and inspect its haul. Nora barely breathed, only stared, and stared, and stared. The dragon regarded her with a blink, and then began to flip through the piles with one massive claw, as if the beast could read and consider. Finally, she could take it no longer. "Well?" she demanded. "Are you going to eat me?" The dragon huffed out some smoke, what might have been amusement, and settled down on the ground, resting its massive head on crossed forelegs. Massive, scaled eyelids settled shut over those unnervingly intelligent reptilian eyes, as if the beast now desired a nap. It was an odd thing to be so ready to die and then to be dismissed. It wasn't relief that flooded Nora. It was rage. Rage that this creature had tormented her people for years, that it bled them dry of their meager wealth, that it had cost Nora her own home, made the people she'd known her entire life willing to cast her out on a madwoman's words. A mad woman who had whispered more to Nora on the way out. Words she'd discarded because she'd expected her death to be swift. Death would come. Nora didn't doubt that. But it need not be hers.
"When you wed the beast, you may save us all, girl," Crazy Bess had said. "A dragon never lowers its guard, save when it retreats to its trove and sheds its scales. Only pieces of its own self can pierce the beast's heart. You must get close when it least expects it, and when you defeat the beast, we will all be safe."
So that was what Nora would do. She would kill the dragon.
Chapter 2. The maiden was new. He had been offered any number of trinkets over the years, but this was the first time the humans had decided to part with one of their own. He hadn't yet decided if he was insulted or flattered. Upon seeing her, even before she'd been led over to him, he'd decided he would have her. Dragons enjoyed acquiring all manner of lovely things, and indeed she was counted among that number. Most humans looked alike, but there was something about her. The way she sat atop the horse, proud and angry. Her unflinching gaze. Well, unflinching until he'd finally picked her up and hauled her to his trove. If the screaming had lasted much longer, he might have dropped her just to spare his ears. He regarded her now with curiosity, through the barest slits of his eyes. He wanted to know what she would do. Escape, no doubt. Oh, she wouldn't get far, but it might be entertaining to watch her try. Alistair was in desperate need of entertainment. Life had gotten dull. Even his yearly haul from this kingdom, he of course harvested from all the local kingdoms, one kingdom each season, did not cheer him. How his only kin had gone to other lands centuries ago and not been seen since. Maybe he needed more treasure. One could never have too much gold. But perhaps there was another issue. He went unchallenged. Everyone was afraid of him. Well, with good reason. Word of his wicked deeds kept the puny mortals in line. He could stomach the indigestion the suits of iron gave him as he swallowed some of the king's men as a reminder that he was not a dragon to be messed with. But having a fearsome reputation cut down on the stomach aches required. Oh, they had tried to kill him in the beginning. If he had been a lesser dragon, perhaps an amethyst or peridot one of their attempts might have even been successful. But Alistair was an obsidian dragon. There was but one thing that could kill him, and some overconfident soldier seeking his fortune was not it. Boredom was a disease. After the past few years, it had taken root in him, a restlessness under his skin that unsettled him, that he could not escape, not even when he flew high above the clouds. He considered the female. To his surprise, she had not yet attempted to flee. No, she kept glancing at him, to see if he stirred. But he'd had centuries to hone his skills, and deceiving a simple human was nothing at all. He resisted the urge to snore dramatically to set her at ease that he was truly asleep. His snores were known to shake mountains and might startle the tiny female. Instead of attempting to scamper off, she examined his haul. Her fingers lingered on one of the tomes the scribes had offered him. She lifted the jeweled cover and began to page through the book. Usually, Alistair despised others touching his hoard. He had set others, including, especially, other dragons on fire for less. There was something different about this human. He had begun to suspect he knew the reason, but he could not be certain. Not in this form. Perhaps it was simply that she was part of his hoard. It made sense. He did not get jealous over his books when a piece of textile draped over them. Why should he mind her? She was simply a belonging. Unless... She turned from the books and examined the rest of the haul. He hadn't brought everything. The livestock was cumbersome. The animals had a habit of defecating in his claws when he carried them, but at least they were tasty. He would return when he wanted an easy snack. Normally, he made a few trips to carry everything, but for some reason, he did not want to leave this female's company. Was she impressed by the wealth he had inspired the others to part with? Alistair never let others see his hoard, so he had no one to show off to. Not that he needed the validation, but surely it was more wealth than the female had ever dreamed of. She should be impressed. But she barely contained a scoff as she took in the golden chaise he'd been offered and thumbed through the textiles with hardly a care. She was dressed in the manner of peasants, or at least that was what Alistair assumed. He didn't spend much time studying the breed. One, they were inferior. Two, they tended to run away screaming, and it had gotten bothersome to try. Humans also tended to defecate in his claws on the rare occasion he deigned to carry them. It was a mark in the female's favor that she had not done so. Would she take some of the fine fabrics and change? He would allow it. She was part of his horde, after all. It reflected badly on him to have a female in such shambles. Even through the tiniest slits in his eyelids, it was obvious her clothing was old and frayed. Holes in her smock, worn boots on her feet. At least she had bathed recently. Sometimes humans forgot, and he was tempted to incinerate the smelly ones on principle. But she ignored the textiles. Alistair bit back on the urge to huff. What? It wasn't good enough for her? But she seemed to be on a mission. Instead of moving towards the exit, she moved farther into the caves. His hoard was buried deep in the mountain, as was proper, but he had a few fragments around, piles of old offerings that decorated the space. She appeared to be searching for something. But what could it be? He twisted his head to see as she moved out of his sight. She flinched at the noise, and he quickly settled back down. A palm was pressed against her generous bosom, as if steadying herself. Alistair bit down a laugh, or what passed for a laugh in this form. The urge startled him. When was the last time he'd had such an impulse? This human. He would keep her alive for a while, he decided. She would not solve the permanent issue of boredom that plagued him, but she could be his entertainment for a time. She continued farther, past where he could see. He had a choice: reveal his human form to her now and set his expectations straight, or wait. Wait and see what mischief his human got up to. She continued to quietly step deeper into the cave. He could be patient, he decided. She would be around for so little time, in the grand duration of his life, that he could afford to draw this out with her. He could savor. So he stayed exactly where he was, waiting. Until she screamed, the sound echoing off the maze of caves and coating them in terror.